The floorboards groaned a symphony of forgotten sighs beneath Lilia's hesitant boots, each creak a breath held in the dusty lungs of the abandoned homestead. Dust, a fine silvered skin, coated every surface, obscuring the past beneath a veil of silent years. It clung to the forgotten rocking chair, draped the skeletal remains of a claw-footed table, and softened the sharp edges of a world left behind. Her breath hitched, a tiny whisper lost in the vast emptiness as she pushed open the attic door, the rusty hinges protesting with a long, drawn-out shriek that echoed the unsettling quiet within her own heart. A shaft of weak, late-afternoon light, splintered and diffused by the grimy window panes, sliced through the gloom, illuminating dancing motes of history, each one a tiny, forgotten memory swirling in the stagnant air. The scent was thick, an oppressive blend of dry rot, forgotten lavender, and something else, something indefinably old, like a dream that had lingered too long after waking. Her fingers, trembling slightly, traced the rough-hewn beam of the doorway, a tremor that had nothing to do with the chill seeping from the corners of the cavernous space. 18 years, and every one of them felt like a carefully constructed wall, built brick by painstaking brick by her quiet, watchful relatives. They had raised her in a silence that tasted of unspoken fears, their eyes always holding a shadow when she dared to ask about her own beginnings, about the mother she never knew, the father who was nothing more than a ghost of a name. "Some things are best left undisturbed, Lilia," her Aunt Ilara would say, her voice soft as worn velvet, yet firm as granite. But here, in this crumbling testament to forgotten lives, disturbance felt like destiny. A dark, hulking shape in the far corner drew her gaze, a silhouette against the sliver of light, like a sleeping beast. As she drew closer, the details slowly emerged from the gloom, a sense of eerie recognition blooming in her chest, cold and unwelcome. It was a cradle, carved from dark, heavy wood, its lines elegant and impossibly delicate despite the weight of years and dust. Her fingers reached out, hesitant, tracing the smooth, worn curve of the headboard, feeling the faint, intricate carvings beneath the grit, a series of intertwined vines, impossibly fine, like threads of a forgotten melody. A shiver, not of cold, but of something deeper, something primal, traced its way up her spine. This cradle, unrocked and still, hummed with a silent, waiting energy, a palpable emptiness that spoke of a life never quite begun. It was then, tucked beneath a yellowed, moth-eaten blanket that lay half-spilled from the cradle's side, that she saw it. A book. Small, leather-bound, its cover scarred and faded, yet somehow radiating a quiet insistence. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. This felt like a secret, unearthed and raw. Her fingers, still trembling, brushed away the thick layer of dust, revealing the rich, dark leather beneath, warm and strangely vital to her touch. The clasp, a tarnished brass buckle, gave way with a soft click that resonated through the silent attic, a punctuation mark in the heavy stillness. She opened the book, the pages brittle and yellowed, releasing a faint, sweet scent of dried flowers and age. And then she saw it. The first page. A drawing, rendered in charcoal, so finely detailed it seemed to breathe. It was a face, delicate and framed by dark, tumbling curls. And those eyes, her own eyes, staring back at her from the yellowed page, wide and luminous, holding a familiar, unnameable sadness. A gasp escaped her lips, a fragile sound lost in the vastness of the attic. Her fingers traced the lines of the drawing, the curve of the cheek, the slight tilt of the chin, a mirror image. It was impossible. Her mind reeled, grasping for a logical explanation, but finding only a widening chasm of disbelief. This was her face, every nuance, every subtle curve, every shadow. Beneath the drawing, delicate looping script spilled across the page. Her breath hitched. The handwriting. It was her own. The familiar slant of the letters, the distinctive curl of the F's ants, the way Hurry's were always dotted with a small, precise circle, rather than a hurried dash. It was a mirror of her own penmanship, as if her hand had guided the quill across this page decades ago. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at her skin, a sensation akin to waking from a nightmare only to find its shadows still clinging to the edges of reality. She felt a profound sense of disorientation, as if the ground beneath her feet had subtly shifted. This was not a coincidence. This was something far deeper, far more unsettling. She began to read, her eyes devouring the words, each one echoing in the silent chamber of her mind. August 12th, 1878. The wind sighs through the gaps in the cabin walls, carrying the scent of pine and something wild, something untamed. Mama says it's the whisper of the mountains, calling us home. But this place, it feels like home already, a home I didn't know I was missing. Lilia's eyes darted back to the date, a century and a half before her own birth, yet the words resonated, a strange, undeniable hum deep within her. The descriptions, the raw, aching beauty of the Dustchime Ridge wilderness, were etched into her own memory, a landscape she knew intimately, had walked countless times. But the feeling, the profound sense of belonging described in these innocent lines, felt like a memory of her own, a faint echo of a longing she had always carried, unspoken and unfulfilled. She turned the page, a growing dread tightening its icy grip around her heart. More drawings. A tiny, silvered locket, exactly like the one her Aunt Alara had given her on her 10th birthday. A family heirloom, her aunt had said, with a quiet, almost mournful inflection. A sprig of dried wild iris, the very flower that grew in profusion by the creek behind her own small cabin, a creek she had waded in since she was a toddler. And then, a series of notes, musical notations, delicate and precise. Her eyes widened, a sudden sharp intake of breath. The lullaby. The very lullaby her Aunt Alara had sung to her every night as a child, a melody that no one else in the valley seemed to know, a haunting, wordless tune that always soothed her to sleep, yet left her with a faint, lingering ache of melancholy. Her aunt had always said it was an old family tune, passed down through generations. But this was more than a passing down. This was an imprint, a blueprint. September 3rd, 1878. The nights grow colder. Papa built a fire that crackles like 1,000 tiny voices. Mama hums a new tune, a lullaby for the little one inside me. She says it's a promise, a whisper of warmth for the winter to come. I hum along, my fingers tracing the outline of the cradle Papa carved, imagining tiny fingers gripping mine. Lilia's own fingers twitched, a phantom sensation of a touch that wasn't there. The cold, unrocked cradle in the corner of the attic seemed to pulse with a silent, terrible question. A promise. A whisper of warmth. A chill, deeper than any draft, permeated her bones. This diary was not just a record. It was a ghost, reaching out from the past, its tendrils intertwining with her own present. Each entry deepened the unsettling mirror. The diary spoke of a birthmark, a small, star-shaped mark just above the left ankle. Lilia's hand instinctively went to her own ankle, covered by the worn leather of her boot, where a faint star-shaped birthmark had always resided, a quiet, innocuous detail of her own body. A birthmark that her relatives had always dismissed as nothing, a peculiarity of birth. But now, it was a brand, a mark of connection, a silent accusation. The girl in the diary, she realized with a jolt that sent a tremor through her entire being, was living her life. Or rather, Lilia was living hers. The world outside the homestead, the vast, unforgiving beauty of Dustchime Ridge, began to blur, replaced by the suffocating intimacy of the attic, the heavy scent of age, and the rhythmic turning of the diary's pages. October 15th, 1878. The baby moves, a tiny flutter beneath my ribs, like a bird trapped in a cage. Mama says it's a sign of life, of hope. But sometimes, when the wind howls, I feel a cold dread, a premonition I cannot name. The cradle sits empty, waiting. Sometimes I just sit and stare at it, wondering, what will she be like? Will she have my eyes? Will she dream my dreams? The questions, posed across the gulf of a century, felt directed at Lilia, a plea from a forgotten past. The cold dread, the premonition. A chill ran through Lilia, a premonition of her own. She did have her eyes. She was dreaming her dreams. The reality of it was a physical ache in her chest, a tightening band around her heart. It was as if her own life was a tapestry, woven with threads already spun, following a pattern already laid out. The diary detailed the slow, arduous winter, the isolation of the homestead, the longing for connection. It spoke of a young girl's burgeoning hopes, her quiet anxieties, her dreams of a future with her family, a future she was building within these very walls. Lilia read of the joy in small things, a patch of sunshine on the cabin floor, the scent of pine needles, the comfort of her mother's humming. And then, subtly, the tone shifted. A faint note of unease began to creep into the entries, a shadow darkening the edges of the girl's optimistic spirit. December 1st, 1878. Mama is tired. Her cough sounds like the wind moaning through the eaves. Papa worries. I try to help, but there's so little I can do. The baby stirs, a quiet comfort, but also a growing fear. What if... No, I won't think it. The unspoken fear hung in the air, a spectral presence. Lilia felt it too, a chilling premonition of loss, an empathy so profound it felt like a shared memory. The entries became shorter, more fragmented, imbued with a palpable sense of struggle. The cold deepened, the snow piled high against the windows, isolating the homestead from the world. The girl's handwriting, once so steady and flowing, began to waver, her words becoming clipped, strained. December 20th, 1878. So cold. Mama is worse. Papa keeps going for wood. The cradle, it feels like it's waiting for something besides life. A silence. The silence. Lilia understood that silence. It was the silence her relatives had wrapped around her. The silence that had always felt like a shield, but now felt like a shroud. The cradle, unrocked, never held. A profound sorrow settled over Lilia, a grief that was not her own, yet felt deeply, agonizingly real. Then came the entry that ripped a raw, ragged hole through Lilia's carefully constructed world. December 24th, 1878, Christmas Eve. The fire is dying. Mama is gone, just gone. And the baby. Oh, my sweet baby. Too small, too weak. No cries, only silence. The cradle. It will never be rocked. My heart is broken into 1,000 pieces. I buried them both. Here, beneath the old oak by the creek. I will never forget. I cannot. The words blurred before Lilia's eyes, each letter a burning ember. A strangled cry escaped her throat, a sound torn from the deepest part of her being. The cradle. A cradle never rocked. A baby lost. A mother gone. And the ache, the profound, unutterable grief that surged through her was not just empathy, it was a remembrance, a reliving. Her hands flew to her own abdomen, a phantom ache blooming there, a phantom loss. She turned the page, desperate for more, desperate for answers, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The final entry. It was even more fragmented, the handwriting almost illegible, scrawled with a desperate urgency. December 25th, 1878. He came. The man. He took Papa. Said he had to. Something about debt. And I couldn't stop him. I'm alone. So alone. I'm leaving. Going to find a new life. A new beginning. I will not be broken. I will not. And then, the page was blank. The diary ended. Abruptly. Savagely. A life story cut short. A final diary entry unfinished. The words hung in the air, a silent scream across the expanse of time. Lilia's mind raced, reeling from the implications, the sudden, devastating weight of this inherited past. Not just a life, but an unfinished life. A life that ended in loss, abandonment, and a defiant promise never to be broken. The silence of the attic became oppressive, a suffocating blanket of grief and unanswered questions. Lilia's own life, The quiet existence she had known now seemed flimsy, a mere echo. Her relatives' fear, their guarded silence, it suddenly made a terrible, undeniable sense. They hadn't wanted her to know. They had tried to protect her from this unbearable inheritance. But why? What was the connection? Why her? Why did this girl, this ghost from the past, look like her, write like her, hum her lullabies, possess her birthmark, live a life that mirrored her own in such chilling detail? The trembling wonder of a life repeating itself mingled with a cold dread, a sense of being trapped in a narrative already written. She closed the diary, her fingers tracing the faint indentation of the unwritten final words. The urge to flee, to escape this haunted space was overwhelming, but a stronger force, a relentless pull, kept her rooted. She had to know. She had to unbury the rest of this story, this unwritten chapter of her own life. The questions swirled in her mind, sharp and insistent. Who was this girl? And why, after all these years, was her story reaching out to Lilia with such terrifying intimacy? Driven by a desperate, insatiable need for answers, Lilia stumbled from the attic, the diary clutched to her chest, its weight a physical manifestation of the burden she now carried. The familiar rooms of the homestead, once comforting in their dusty silence, now felt imbued with the spectral presence of the past, the ghost of a girl who looked just like her. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the dimming light, seemed to whisper her name, a name that felt too close to her own, too entwined. She walked through the silent house, a phantom limb aching with memories that weren't hers, yet felt so undeniably real. The kitchen, with its cold, empty hearth, seemed to reverberate with the echo of a mother's soft humming, a father's heavy boots. The bedroom, with its narrow, iron-framed bed, felt imbued with the quiet desperation of a young girl's last moments with her dying mother. It was as if the very air of the homestead held the residue of their lives, a scent of sorrow and unfinished hope. Lilia knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the answers lay not within these walls, but out there, in the vast, unforgiving expanse of Dust Chime Ridge, the old oak by the creek, the final resting place of a mother and her unrocked baby. A defiance stirred within her, a fierce, nascent spark of rebellion against the narrative that had been laid out, a refusal to be merely an echo. If her life was a repetition, then she would defy the ending. She would change it. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the valley as Lilia stepped out of the homestead, the diary still clutched in her hand, a compass pointing her towards the past. The air was sharp, biting, yet she felt no cold, only a burning resolve. The creek, a ribbon of icy water, wound its way through the valley, its murmur a constant melancholic hum. Lilia followed its winding path, her eyes scanning the familiar landscape for the ancient oak, a landmark etched into her memory since childhood. She knew this land, every rock, every bend in the creek, every rise and fall of the rugged terrain. But now, it was as if she saw it through different eyes, the eyes of the girl in the diary, a landscape imbued with the echoes of joy and profound sorrow. When she found the oak, its gnarled branches reaching towards the darkening sky like a supplicant, a sense of quiet reverence settled over her. The ground beneath it was undisturbed, unmarked by any grave, yet she felt their presence, the mother and child, a silent, heartbreaking vigil. It was here, in this sacred, desolate space, that the weight of the inherited grief truly settled upon her shoulders. She spent the long, cold night beneath the oak, wrapped in a blanket salvaged from the homestead, the diary open on her lap, illuminated by the faint glow of the stars. She reread every entry, meticulously, searching for any hidden meaning, any clue that would unravel the impossible connection. Each word deepened the mystery, each sentence solidifying the terrifying reality that her life was inextricably linked to this lost girl. The more she read, the more she felt herself slipping into the past, becoming one with the unnamed girl, her hopes, her fears, her devastating loss. It was a merging, a terrifying dissolution of her own identity into a past that was not her own, yet felt undeniably hers. The moon, a thin sliver of silver, rose above the mountains, casting long spectral shadows that danced around her, like the ghosts of forgotten dreams. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange, Lilia rose, her body stiff with cold, her mind reeling with the weight of her discovery. She knew, with absolute clarity, that she couldn't return to her quiet life, to the carefully constructed silences of her relatives. Not now. Not after this. The diary was a beacon, a desperate plea from the past, and Lilia was compelled to answer. She needed to find someone who remembered. Someone who could bridge the chasm of a century. Someone who could explain this impossible replication of life. The Dust Chime Ridge was vast and sparsely populated, but there were old-timers, stubborn and resilient, who had lived their entire lives within its rugged embrace. And somewhere among them, she hoped, lay the key to her identity, the missing piece of this terrifying puzzle. Her journey began, a solitary quest through the silent, unforgiving landscape. She traded her meager supplies for information, listened intently to hushed whispers in remote trading posts, and followed faint trails that led to isolated cabins, clinging to the mountainsides like stubborn lichen. Each encounter was a slow, arduous chipping away at the silence that had surrounded her own life. Most of the old-timers offered only blank stares, vague recollections of a forgotten homestead, a long-ago tragedy. The story of a family lost to the harsh winter, swallowed by the unforgiving wilderness, was not uncommon in these parts. But Lilia pressed on, her resolve hardening with each unanswered question, her desperation growing with every dead end. The diary, a silent companion, became her guide, its pages whispering of a life that demanded to be acknowledged. Days bled into weeks, the harsh beauty of the landscape a constant, unforgiving presence. Lilia faced skepticism, indifference, and the quiet, almost pitying looks of those who thought she was chasing ghosts. But she could not stop. The unsettling connection to the girl in the diary had become an unshakable part of her, a living, breathing entity that pulsed beneath her skin. She felt a profound sense of urgency, as if the girl in the diary was still waiting, still unfinished, still yearning for resolution. The motif of the cradle unrocked burned in her mind, a symbol of unfulfilled promise, a life unlived, and the identical handwriting, the lullabies that no one taught her. These were not mere coincidences. They were threads of a destiny she was compelled to unravel. One frigid afternoon, a biting wind whipping dust into her eyes, Lilia stumbled upon a tiny, ramshackle cabin, nestled deep in a secluded ravine, almost hidden from view by a thick stand of ancient pines. A wisp of smoke curled from its crooked chimney, a rare sign of life in this desolate corner of the ridge. Her heart hammered with a sudden, frantic hope. This felt different. A frail, ancient woman, her face a road map of wrinkles, sat hunched by a sputtering fire, her eyes milky with age, held a surprising depth. Her name was Ilara, a name that sent a jolt through Lilia's heart, an echo of her own aunt. Lilia felt a strange, inexplicable sense of recognition, a pull of familiarity that went beyond the shared name. Ilara greeted her with a quiet, almost knowing gaze, her voice raspy with years of disuse. Lilia, desperate, wasted no time. She pulled out the diary, its worn leather a stark contrast to the rough-hewn table between them. "Do you know this place?" Lilia asked, her voice trembling, pointing to the charcoal drawing of the homestead on the first page. Ilara's eyes, clouded with cataracts, peered at the drawing, a faint flicker of recognition igniting in their depths. A slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Aye," she rasped, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "The West Homestead, long gone now, a sad tale." Lilia's heart leapt. West, her own surname. The first concrete thread, a tangible connection to the past. Lilia pushed the diary across the table, opened to the page with the girl's drawing. And this girl? Lilia's voice was barely a whisper. Alara's gaze sharpened. Her aged fingers, gnarled and trembling, reached out to touch the charcoal portrait. A long, drawn-out sigh escaped her lips, a sound heavy with the weight of memory. "Mercy," she whispered, her voice laced with a profound sorrow. "Mercy West." Lilia gasped, the name a cold, hard stone in her throat. Mercy. The girl in the diary finally had a name, and her surname, West. It solidified the impossible connection, twisted the knife of dread and wonder deeper into her heart. Then, Alara's eyes, still fixed on the drawing, widened almost imperceptibly. Her gaze shifted from the charcoal image to Lilia's face, a slow, dawning comprehension spreading across her features. Her hand, still resting on the page, began to tremble. Her eyes darted back and forth, from the drawing to Lilia, then back again, a growing horror blooming in their depths. "The eyes," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible. "The very same eyes, and the birthmark." Her voice trailed off, a sound of utter disbelief. Lilia felt a cold sweat prickle her skin. This was it, the moment of reckoning. "She looked just like you," Alara finally managed, her voice a choked gasp. "It's impossible," Lilia explained, her voice raw with desperation, how she found the diary, how every detail, every agonizing entry mirrored her own life, the lullaby, the handwriting, the unrocked cradle. Alara listened, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning realization. "The cradle," Alara whispered, her voice regaining a strange, ethereal strength. "Her papa carved it for her, for the baby. And then—" Her words caught in her throat, a wave of profound sadness washing over her ancient face. The winter of 78. It was a brutal one. Many souls lost. Her mama, she passed. And the babe, too small to live. Mercy was heartbroken. Lilia nodded, the words from the diary echoing in her mind, a confirmation of the unbearable sorrow. "And the man who took her papa," Lilia pressed, her voice urgent. Alara's face darkened, a shadow passing over her features. "A cruel man, a debt collector. He took him for payment, for a debt long forgotten. Mercy was left alone." Her words were a confirmation of the diary's truncated ending, the abrupt and devastating loss. Lilia's heart ached for Mercy, for the unimaginable burden she had carried. Then, a chilling question formed on Lilia's lips, one she had feared to ask, yet knew she must. Did she ever leave? Alara's gaze drifted past Lilia, as if seeing ghosts in the dust-filled air. She did. She left with a fierce determination, they said, to start anew, to find a different ending. I heard she eventually found her way to a small, quiet community far to the east, changed her name, tried to erase the past. Lilia's mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of possibilities. Her own relatives, the silence, the unspoken fears. Could it be? Could Mercy have been her great-grandmother, a direct lineage explaining the terrifying mirroring of lives? "But it's impossible," Alara continued, her voice trembling, her gaze returning to Lilia filled with a profound, almost desperate confusion. You are Mercy. Look at you. The same face, the same eyes, the same birthmark. How can two lives repeat themselves so perfectly?" Lilia felt the profound, unsettling wonder of it, the trembling sensation of a life repeating itself. It was not just a story she was unburying. It was a part of her own being, a deep, resonant echo from the past. "My relatives," Lilia began, her voice hoarse. "They raised me in silence. They never spoke of my parents, or my family's past, just that they were gone. They always said I was a miracle of resilience." Alara's eyes widened, a dawning horror in their depths. "Resilience," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Mercy was a fighter. She refused to be broken. She carried that spirit with her. A cold, undeniable truth settled upon Lilia. Her ancestors, those who had raised her, were descendants of Mercy. The silence, the fear of her questions, was a desperate attempt to protect her from the painful inheritance of Mercy's unfinished life. They had wanted to break the cycle, to spare her the grief. But it was too late. The diary, the unrocked cradle, the mirrored face, they had found her. A profound sense of purpose, a fierce, protective instinct, bloomed within Lilia. She was not just an echo, she was a continuation. Mercy's unfinished ending was her beginning. The defiance that had glimmered in the girl's final entry now burned brightly within Lilia. She would not let this story end in loss and despair. She would change the ending. The motif of the unrocked cradle, once a symbol of sorrow, now transformed into a potent symbol of defiance. She would rock the cradle. She would bring life where there was only silence. Elara, her eyes still wide with disbelief, slowly reached out and took Lilia's hand, her touch surprisingly firm. "You are here for a reason, child," she said, her voice filled with a strange, spiritual resonance. "The past is calling to you. Don't let it drown you. Let it guide you." Lilia felt the weight of generations, the legacy of an unfinished life, a sacred burden she now carried. The silence in the cabin was broken only by the crackle of the fire, the vast emptiness of the dust chime ridge outside, and the frantic beating of Lilia's own heart, a drumbeat for two lives intertwined. Lilia left Elara's cabin with a new resolve, a quiet determination radiating from her. The knowledge, though unsettling, had also brought a strange sense of liberation. She was not alone. She carried the spirit of Mercy within her, a resilient, defiant spirit that refused to be extinguished. The silence she had been raised in, once oppressive, now felt like a carefully constructed vault, meant to protect something precious. But the vault had been opened, and now the story, Mercy's story, was Lilia's to reclaim, to complete. She understood now why her relatives had feared her questions. They feared the pain of a history that repeated itself, the burden of a life that had ended in sorrow and abandonment. They had tried to protect her by burying the past, but the past, like a deep-rooted tree, refused to be severed. The journey back to the homestead was different. The mountains no longer felt foreboding, but like ancient guardians, holding the secrets of her lineage. The winding creek, once a melancholic companion, now murmured with the echoes of a distant lullaby, a promise of life. The dust chime ridge, vast and untamed, was no longer just a setting. It was the crucible of her inherited past, the landscape of her unfolding destiny. Every rock, every twisted tree, every whisper of the wind seemed to speak of Mercy, of her quiet strength, her heartbreaking losses, her defiant journey. Lilia walked with purpose, her steps sure, her gaze fixed on a future that now felt inextricably linked to a past she was determined to heal. Back at the homestead, the attic, once a place of chilling discovery, now held a different resonance. The dust, still clinging to everything, seemed less like a shroud and more like a gentle veil of time waiting to be lifted. The carved cradle, once a stark symbol of a life unlived, now pulsed with a quiet, powerful energy. Lilia ran her hand along its smooth, dark wood, tracing the intricate carvings of intertwined vines, imagining Mercy's own fingers doing the same, centuries ago. A profound sense of continuity washed over her, a deep connection to the young girl who had once dreamed of a future within these very walls. The spectral presence that had once filled the homestead now felt less like a ghost and more like a guiding spirit, a quiet companion. She thought of the final, unfinished entry in the diary, Mercy's desperate promise. "I will not be broken. I will not." And Lilia knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul, that she would finish that sentence for Mercy. She would not be broken. She would complete the story. The core theme of inheriting unfinished lives now held a tangible, undeniable weight. Lilia was not just inheriting blood. She was inheriting a legacy of resilience, a broken promise waiting to be mended, a cradle waiting to be rocked. The silence that had defined her upbringing now felt like a temporary pause, a deep breath before the symphony of her own making began. The days that followed were a blur of transformation. Lilia cleaned the homestead, scrubbing away layers of dust and time, polishing the forgotten surfaces until they gleamed with a faint, hopeful light. She tended to the overgrown garden, coaxing new life from the barren soil. She repaired the broken windows, letting in the sunlight that had been denied to the house for decades. Each task was an act of defiance, a quiet, deliberate reclaiming of a space that had been abandoned to sorrow. She felt Mercy's presence in every corner, not as a specter of grief, but as a silent, encouraging witness. The house was no longer just an abandoned shell. It was a sanctuary, a bridge between two lives, two timelines. As the homestead slowly came back to life, so too did Lilia. The quiet, watchful girl, raised in a silence that stifled questions, began to emerge, shedding the skin of her past. She still carried the weight of Mercy's story, but it no longer crushed her. Instead, it fueled her, gave her purpose. The unrocked cradle, once a source of aching sorrow, now sat in the light-filled attic, waiting. It was a symbol of unfulfilled promise, but now it was also a symbol of hope, a blank slate for a future that Lilia was determined to write. She found herself humming the lullaby, the haunting, wordless tune that her aunt had sung to her, the same melody etched into Mercy's diary. But now, it wasn't just a childhood memory. It was a connection, a sacred thread weaving her to Mercy. She hummed it as she worked, as she sat by the fire, as she watched the sun set over the ridge. The melody, once melancholic, now carried a new resonance, a quiet joy, a profound sense of peace. It was a lullaby for a life that was finally beginning. Spring arrived, painting the dust-chime ridge in vibrant hues of green and gold, a stark contrast to the stark winter landscape. Lilia, sitting on the porch of the now reclaimed homestead, felt a profound sense of belonging, a rootedness she had never known. The sun warmed her face, the scent of pine and wild blossoms filled the air, and the murmur of the creek, now rushing with snowmelt, was a vibrant song of life. She had faced the past, confronted the echoes, and now she was ready to embrace the future. One crisp morning, a gentle knock echoed through the silence of the homestead. Lilia's heart gave a jolt. She opened the door to find a young woman standing on her porch, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. She was pregnant, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. "I heard," the woman began, her voice hesitant. "I heard there was someone here now, that the old homestead was alive again." Lilia looked at the woman, a profound sense of destiny washing over her. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, what this moment meant. The woman's name was Clara, and she was alone, seeking refuge, a new beginning, just as Mercy had. Her husband had been lost to a mining accident, and with no family left, she had journeyed west, drawn by a vague whisper of opportunity, a desperate hope for a new life. She spoke of her fears, her anxieties, her dreams for the baby growing within her. Lilia listened, a quiet understanding blooming in her heart. This was not just a stranger. This was a continuation of a story, a chance to defy the ending. Lilia offered Clara shelter, warmth, and the quiet comfort of a shared understanding. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. Clara, in her vulnerability, reminded Lilia of Mercy, of her hopes for the baby she would never hold. The homestead, once a silent tomb of memory, now filled with the gentle hum of conversation, the soft creak of floorboards, the comforting scent of wood smoke and freshly baked bread. Life was returning, slowly, surely, to the place where it had once been so brutally extinguished. As the weeks passed, Lilia became Clara's confidant, her protector, her silent witness. She shared the story of Mercy, of the diary, of the unrocked cradle, of the haunting connection that spanned a century. Clara listened, her eyes wide with wonder and a deep, empathetic understanding. The story, once Lilia's alone, now became a shared narrative, a testament to resilience, to the enduring power of hope. The weight of the past no longer felt like a solitary burden, but a shared legacy. The day Clara went into labor was a day of profound intensity, a swirl of fear and fierce hope. Lilia was there, a steadying presence, guiding Clara through the long, arduous hours, her hands strong and reassuring. The air in the homestead crackled with a palpable tension, the promise of new life hanging heavy in the air. Lilia thought of Mercy, of her quiet, desperate dreams for the baby she would never know, of the unrocked cradle in the attic, waiting. This was a defiance, a sacred act of changing the ending, and then with a final triumphant cry, a baby was born. A girl. Small, fragile, but impossibly vibrant, her tiny lungs filling the silent homestead with a sound of pure, unadulterated life. Lilia cut the cord, her hands trembling, tears blurring her vision. She wrapped the newborn in a soft flannel blanket, holding her close, feeling the fragile weight of new beginnings. The air filled with the sweet scent of a newborn, the quiet miracle of life. The unrocked cradle, for so long a symbol of sorrow, now held the promise of fulfillment. Clara, exhausted but radiant, looked at Lilia, her eyes filled with gratitude. "She needs a name," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Lilia looked at the tiny, perfect face, at the faint, star-shaped birthmark just above her left ankle. A ghost of a mark, almost imperceptible. She thought of the diary, open on the bedside table, of the charcoal drawing with the familiar eyes, of the haunting lullaby, of the fierce, defiant spirit of a girl who had refused to be broken. She closed the diary and named the baby after the girl who never held hers.